You live surrounded by more people than any human in history. Your city holds more bodies in 10 blocks than your ancestors would meet in a lifetime. And your brain, still running software designed for a group of 30 people who knew your name and slept within earshot. That mismatch doesn't just make you tired. It reprograms how you act. The rat in the overcrowded pen didn't choose to stop caring for its young. Its brain just shut that system down. You're in the same pen. You just can't see the walls yet. In July 1968, John B. Calhoun placed 4 pairs of mice into a steel box measuring 101 by 101 inches. He set it up so they'd never want for anything. Food dispensers refilled automatically. Water bottles stayed full. Climate controls kept the air at 68 degrees. No pathogens were introduced. No predators could reach them. Nothing could threaten their survival. The habitat held 256 nest boxes, enough space for 3,840 mice to live comfortably. Calhoun called it a mouse paradise. By June 1972, the last mouse died. Population peaked at 2,200, barely half capacity, then collapsed to 0. Not one of the survivors could reproduce. The final 122 just sat there, grooming themselves in corners, sleek and scar-free, too broken to even try. What killed them? Look, Calhoun had been running versions of this experiment since 1947. He built a 10,000 square foot outdoor pen in Rockville, Maryland, and filled it with rats. The space could theoretically hold 5,000. The population stabilized at 150. The rats didn't run out of food or room. They just stopped breeding. By 1958, Calhoun moved indoors. He built a 10 by 14 foot cage, divided it into 4 rooms, and dropped in 32 to 56 rats. At feeding time, 60 out of 80 rats crammed into one pen, even though 3 others sat empty. They'd learned to associate food with the company of other rats. Males came back with bitten tails, torn fur, blood on their backs. Females attacked their own young or abandoned them mid-birth. In the most disoriented groups, 96% of infants died. Calhoun coined a term for it in his 1962 Scientific American article. He called it the behavioral sink. Universe 25, the mouse experiment, was supposed to be the clean proof. For the first 315 days, everything looked perfect. The population doubled every 55 days. Then, at 620 mice, something broke. Doubling time stretched to 145 days. Males stopped fighting for mates, stopped defending territory, stopped doing much of anything except eating and grooming. Calhoun called them the beautiful ones. Their coats were sleek because they had no scars, no contact. Females turned violent or indifferent. Some trampled their young. Others couldn't carry pregnancies to term. But wait, here's what Calhoun didn't mention in the early papers. The beautiful ones weren't just withdrawing because there were too many mice. They were the sons of stressed mothers, raised in collapsing social structures where normal mouse behavior had already stopped making sense. These weren't mice choosing isolation. They were mice who never learned how to be mice in the first place. The damage was baked in a generation earlier, which means the overcrowding didn't directly break them. It broke their parents, and the parents passed down the broken system. That's not the same thing as too many bodies in a box. That's trauma becoming biology. On day 600, the last surviving birth was recorded. After that, nothing. The mice weren't starving. They weren't sick. They had simply stopped being a society. Calhoun sat in a loft above the habitat for hours every day over 3 years, watching each mouse marked with a unique color. He saw what he believed was the future of humanity. He called it spiritual death, the first death, before the body gives out. Now here's the thing. A lot of scientists think Calhoun created the disaster himself. The cages were cleaned every 6 to 8 weeks. Mice lived surrounded by feces, urine, rotting food, dead bodies. Critics pointed out that no one knows if the original 8 mice were siblings. If they were, inbreeding alone could explain the collapse. Temperature in the habitat could hit 32 degrees Celsius. And the kicker? The experiment has never been successfully replicated. Not once. Not successfully. Then, in the late 1970s, a Canadian psychologist named Bruce K. Alexander ran a different experiment. He called it Rat Park. He built a large enclosure, about 200 times the size of a standard lab cage, filled it with wood chips and tin cans, and painted walls to look like a park. He put in wheels, balls, space to dig and explore. Then he added both male and female rats so they could socialize, breed, just live. And here's the key detail. He gave them 2 water sources. Plain water in one bottle, morphine-laced water in the other. Now this matters because up until Rat Park, the reigning theory about addiction came from solo cage experiments, where isolated rats would drink drugged water compulsively until they died. Alexander wanted to know if that said more about the drug or the cage. So he compared the park rats to the caged ones. In isolation, rats drank the morphine water almost exclusively. In Rat Park, they mostly ignored it. They'd taste it, sure, but they preferred plain water, preferred each other. The ones who did drink never came close to overdose. What changed wasn't the drug, it was whether the rat had a reason to stay present. When Alexander's grad student tried to replicate the study in 1996, it failed, but the idea stuck. So maybe density isn't the variable that matters. Maybe it's what happens when density strips away the things that make life feel navigable. Calhoun's rats weren't just packed in, they had nothing to do. No reason to move, no hierarchy that made sense anymore. The beautiful ones didn't withdraw because there were too many mice. They withdrew because being a mouse had stopped meaning anything. And that's where it gets strange. We love to treat Calhoun's experiments as a warning about overpopulation, and maybe they are, but the thing that collapsed first wasn't space or resources, it was purpose. The rats that thrived were the ones in groups of about 12, small enough that every member knew their role. Once the group tipped past that, everything unraveled. You're not a mouse, but you're still wired for a group of 30. And when you walk through a subway car full of strangers, your brain doesn't know what to do with them. It can't hold that many faces, that many lives, that many possible threats. So it shuts part of itself down. You stop making eye contact. You stop caring. It's not because you're cruel. It's because the system is overloaded. You're not watching society collapse. You're just sitting in your corner, grooming yourself while the world moves on. Actually, think about the last time you were on a crowded train during rush hour. You probably stared at your phone, right? Calhoun tracked the same behavior in his mice. He measured something he called social velocity. How many interactions a mouse could process before it just stopped responding. In Universe 25, once a mouse hit about 60 contacts in a 6-hour period, it would freeze up, groom compulsively, withdraw to a corner. Commuters in Tokyo and New York show the same threshold. Eye contact drops, cortisol spikes, people put in earbuds or pull out phones. That's not rudeness. That's your brain hitting the same velocity ceiling Calhoun's mice hit, shutting down social processing to avoid overload. The withdrawal isn't a choice. It's a biological circuit breaker flipping off because the system was never built for this kind of load. Calhoun died in 1995. His experiments are still taught, still cited, still argued over. Some people see them as proof that we're headed for extinction. Others see them as junk science dressed up in apocalyptic language. Dig into the sources yourself. Link below. If you want to see where this goes next, we'll talk about the one species that tried to escape the behavioral sink by building up instead of out. Subscribe if you want to know whether the skyscrapers saved us or just hid the collapse.